Let's get the thoughts now of the Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan. Very good morning to you and thanks for joining us on BBC Newsroom Live. Your assessment, first of all, of what you've heard so far from this Brussels summit.
Well, I agree with everything I've just heard. I think it's going well, and there is a logic on both sides that is impelling us towards a deal that is in everyone's interest. I mean, countries don't trade with each other out of kindness or as a favour. The day we leave the EU, we become its single biggest export destination. We have an interest in the prosperity of our European neighbours. We want them to be strong, we want them to be rich, we want them to be good customers, and we want them to be stable allies. And I think that logic applies both ways around.
Now, those Conservatives who were urging Theresa May to issue an ultimatum on potentially walking away with no deal, many of them arguing that they were doing that to bolster her negotiating position in Brussels over these couple of days. Irrespective of what you think of that, do you think that that group will be satisfied by what she's achieved so far over the course of this summit?
I mean, I think it's really important that people are not kind of wanting to be belligerent for the sake of it. Sometimes in the coverage you get the impression that Eurosceptics are unreasonable people who will be satisfied if she's kind of rude about foreigners. That just isn't the point. That was never the motive. The Leave campaign was about democracy and freedom and global engagement. On the issue of should we have a plan B for if there's no deal, no one goes into any negotiations without a fallback position. That isn't really about whether you will leave or remain. It would be crazy. Imagine that you were buying a house or a car and you said, before we've even started, I want you to know that I'm definitely buying. I mean, what kind of price do you think you would then get? So we need to have provisions in place. And by provisions in place, I don't mean circulating contingency papers among civil servants. I mean, actually putting in the infrastructure and getting everything ready. I hope it won't be necessary, but it would be a dereliction of the government's duty not to have done it.
But does it ease the pressure? I accept what you say, that most people don't go into negotiations wanting to be, awkward for the sake of it. But do you think it does ease the pressure on Theresa May politically at home?
I mean, I don't think there is anyone in the Conservative Party who doesn't want a deal. I mean, all of us accept that it is suboptimal for both sides if there isn't a deal, not only on trade, but on intelligence and policing and research and so on. Everybody thinks that is the best situation. The only people who are not in that category are a handful of Labour MPs who have now said we're so determined that we should have a deal at any cost that we're not prepared to even countenance a no-deal outcome, and we'd vote against it. And that, of course, is telling Brussels that we'll sign whatever they put in front of us.
It is rather glaring, though, isn't it, Mr. Hannan, that Theresa May was referencing her Florence speech in the last few minutes on the issue specifically of the Brexit bill, saying no one would have to pay more or should have to pay more or receive less as a result of the UK leaving the EU. The argument, surely, or the thoughts or the details should have evolved more by now, shouldn't they?
Well, there's a very easy way of testing this. We could simply put the question of financial liabilities to international arbitration. We could go to an international tribunal and say, look at all the assets, look at all the liabilities, and tell us what's owed. And I think both sides' lawyers are telling them the same thing, that if that were to happen, the figure would be a very low one. And there's a very easy way of demonstrating this, which is they're saying Britain is a net contributor and we'll have all these ongoing commitments in the future. Would they apply the same thing if a net recipient were to leave, the other way around? In other words, if Greece or Slovakia or Poland were to leave, would they then say, we need to work out how much money we're going to continue to give you after you've left? Of course not, right? So what we're talking about is not the strict legal liability. What we're talking about is whether Britain takes a relatively generous interpretation for the sake of good relations with our friends and allies and for the sake of wanting the European project to succeed, because we don't want to collapse on our doorstep. Do we go beyond the letter of the law? And of course, the answer to that will depend on what the final deal is. We're not going to pony up until we know what we're getting. But for the sake of getting a deal where Britain ends up as a close friend and ally, and where the European Union continues to succeed, that's an area where I think we should be prepared to be flexible and generous.
OK, Daniel Hannan, MEP, thank you very much.
They thought we'd just roll over and have our tummies tickled, and they've suddenly discovered that the British bulldog doesn't behave like that.